Hello everyone, it's so exciting to see so many people here this evening. The engagement with the idea of research placements for AHP courses is really positive. My name is Eva Patel and I'm in my final week of a leadership placement here at Sheffield Hallam University, along with Harris Baird and Grace Metham. Over the last 6 weeks, we have explored research placements as part of our project to scope possibilities and create a roadmap for these placements to be introduced in the Advanced Wellbeing Research Centre at Sheffield Hallam University. We would like to share with you our findings and thoughts around what a research placement could and should look like for both students and educators. Our case for change for this project was inspired around the Health Education England's research and innovation strategy. The goals of this being to form evidence-based education underpinned by research and innovation, and 2, to encourage positivity and engagement around research and innovation to increase the volume of people going into the healthcare workforce with the appropriate skill set. As I'm sure as many of you are aware, in order to meet the growing demands of the health and social care system, universities have increased places within the AHP courses. Therefore, an education priority, due to these increases in student numbers and limiting factors such as the pandemic, is a focus on ensuring suitable placement opportunities are available for students. And within each of our health professions, we need to have skills in all 4 pillars of practice, which are clinical practice, education, leadership, and research. Providing placements in these areas will hopefully produce students qualifying into the workforce with a broader skill set, providing a health service with best practice in all 4 pillars. Over to you, Harris.
So here's a look at who we spoke to and what we learned. Firstly, researchers who had the potential to get involved with research placements. We learned about their work, how students could benefit them, and what it could provide for students. For example, we learned that data protection work would be suitable for professions involved with technology-based outcomes. They expressed their concerns around projects being insufficient as the sole focus of a placement. So we discussed that flexibility would be an important aspect in allowing students to switch between projects based on what's available. We also spoke to students currently on a research placement, and we'll be hearing more about their experience later. We heard from research educators who had recently taken on students. They provided us with example timetables and tips on what worked best for them. When we spoke to course leads, we learned all professions were eager to grow the research profile of their profession, though the main challenge was around the competency-based courses. We also met with a public involvement research group who helped us understand how students can interact with the public through these placements. One example was by speaking to public involvement groups at the funding application level of research. Over to you, Grace.
So we found that students could be involved in multiple stages across the research process. For example, in the ideas and concept stage, they can be involved in running focus groups with patients or patient-public involvement groups, which would allow you to see what the patients would like and where they think the problems are and what would be most beneficial for the patients to get out of it. In research design, they could be involved in planning workshops and writing out the aims and objectives. They can support funding applications by doing literature reviews and also identifying and summarising relevant information from large volume of complex information in multiple sources. They could support ethics forms by preparing statements regarding ethical principles. For data collection, they could be involved in face-to-face interactions, including interviews, and also included in organising the data collection process. The analysis stage could involve them doing a critical analysis of literature surrounding the project or of data. and then they can be involved in interpreting the data and assessment results. The students could be involved in involving patients in the dissemination and when sharing results. Over to you, Eva.
One thing that we considered in our project was the assessment of students and how they will meet their learning outcomes. A key way of addressing this is discussing with students throughout the placement how the skills they're using and developing relate and are transferable through their clinical practice in the future and within their course. Some assessment challenges were presented by courses with competency-based outcomes, such as radiotherapy and oncology and paramedics. However, research placements can meet some key competencies, such as professionalism and reflection, for example. Students could also have them on a formative basis, or introduce a supplementing marking criteria so that they can be achieving research and clinical criteria. This would be probably in a hybrid model, or even these placements could be an elective placement if that's part of the course. Some ideas and sources of feedback that we've thought about is feedback from other professionals or other students that the students would interact with. This will really help benefit their professional relationships within teams of their own professions and MDTs and with researchers. Creating a shared folder for the students so that they can easily share their work. This makes collaboration between the students much easier, and it also means as an educator you can remotely access the students' progress and what work they're getting on with. Whenever there's interaction with members of the public or service users are involved in the project, feedback around this is really important for therapeutic relationships. And encouraging students to do a final presentation of their work will really, of their learnings and their findings throughout the placement, is a really positive way of allowing the students to think about what they've done and how they've progressed throughout their placement, and also show off all of what they've accomplished throughout the placement as well. We think weekly reflections are really important, especially when progressing throughout the placement. It's a key opportunity for educators and students to discuss where this relates to their practice and their future in their future careers, but also allows the students to really consistently reflect on what they've been doing. Also, encouraging students to ask for feedback independently with the people they interact with is really important. Getting this feedback firsthand really makes us as students think about exactly how we acted in the situation and how we can improve, and what went well and what needs to be addressed for future interactions for therapeutic relationships. Some tips for supervisors or educators is planning. As soon as you know that there's a research placement student joining you within your project, start planning ahead. Think about where this research placement is going to fit into your project, so that you can get the most out of it, but also so that the student can gain the most from the research placement itself. Patient access, think about where possible you might have service user interaction. This will really engage the students and also again will help with their therapeutic relationships moving forward through their careers. Research and clinical split could potentially having a placement where there's a few days a week in research focused, and then a few days a week potentially with students in the community or in a clinical setting. Would that be beneficial to your project or suitable for your schedules? Preparation, ensuring that you prepare your student for coming into the placement, so potentially giving them some pre-reading around the topic of your project or around the research that you're doing, so that they're prepared and they can come into the placement with an idea of what they're doing, but also potentially meeting with the student prior to the commencement of your placement, as this could ease any anxieties, as these sorts of placements there's not a lot of expectations and awareness for students around these placements. So there will be some anxieties or questions around what their placement's going to look like. This way that then they can come into the placement with all their thoughts eased and they will engage better with the process. Adaptability, being adaptable, be prepared to adapt throughout the placement, as some students may join on the placement and really get on with the research and fly through it, and you may have to give them more things to do, or it could be something that's a little bit more tricky or slower, and you're going to have to organize the deadlines that you set the students. And make sure that you factor in discussion time and frequent check-ins. This is really important to ensure that the project and the research that the student is doing is getting on and is being done, but also for the students so that they can really see how they're developing and what they need to do to work on throughout their research placement. Over to you, Grace.
So the recommended model we suggest for a research placement would be to have collaborative learning, where having multiple students to one researcher. This would allow the students to support each other and provide peer feedback. And we think that for about 4 students could go on a placement with one full-time researcher, and the researcher would be able to provide them with the right support that they need. This may vary though, depending on how much work you have going on in the placement and what stage you are at, as we want the students to still be actively learning. We suggest that an even number of students would allow them to provide the best peer support for each other. A split share model would have one main educator and then a co-educator for each placement to assist with feedback, assessments and support, and will help take the pressure off the educators. Multidisciplinary groups of students would be ideal, but we understand that while educators are getting used to how research placements run, a single profession placement would probably be best to start, as multidisciplinary teams can be more complex due to different courses having different learning objectives. Long-arm supervision would allow work to be distributed and assessed remotely. This would be especially good in certain courses the students can't give professional advice without having a supervisor there. For example, with the dietetics course at Sheffield Hallam, they can't give nutritional advice to patients without having a supervisor there. So in the past, they've had a phone call with their profession-specific supervisor, and then would have an educator that might not be necessarily relevant to their supervision in the vicinity, and they talk through on the phone with their profession-specific educator about what they were going to do, and that would allow them to still treat the patient. A hybrid model would be good for all AHP courses, as it allows more clinical experience, but especially with competence-based professions, to ensure that they are in clinical setting, to allow them to accomplish the skills that they need to complete their placement. Over to you, Eve Harris.
To summarise the information we collected, we've created a website to present the outcomes. It's for students and educators involved with research and leadership placements. We also wanted to create a space for anyone to get an introduction to the 4 pillars of practice. The benefits of this website are that it's centralised and accessible, and it can be continually updated by future placement students to remain relevant and accurate. We hope this will also address the lack of awareness we identified amongst AHP students in terms of pillars of practice and research and leadership placements. Next slide, please, Eva. So on the left, you can see a sort of general introduction to what we've been talking about today, and on the right, sort of short definitions around the sort of topics of research. In the bottom right, we have a link amongst other useful resources that we have to Health Education England's guide on research placements. I'll also put a link in the chat for this. It's the most informative document you'll find online regarding these placements, and it sort of covers the background, suggestions of sort of methods and tips on how to get the most out of these placements for educators and students. Over to you, Eva.
Now we'll be hearing about research placements from an educator's perspective. Emma Swingwood is the respiratory lead at University Hospital of Bristol and Western NHS Trust. She is also the chair of the Association of Chartered Physiotherapists in Respiratory Care. Emma can't be with us, can't be here tonight, but she has recorded a presentation for us. I'm just going to share it now.
Hi everybody, thank you for joining us this evening. I'm really pleased to be able to share some of the processes I've gone through really in developing a research placement, which hopefully we're going to be able to offer kind of in the spring stroke summer, if that ever comes. So my name is Emma, I'm a respiratory physio primarily based in Bristol. And at the minute, I'm really lucky to be able to do one of the NIHR clinical doctoral research fellowships, which means I've been seconded out for 3 years. And I'm in essence about halfway through. So I'm due to finish in October 2023. So the situation that I was in was that in essence, I felt a bit guilty, to be honest, because I've had 3 years out of my normal day job, and yet I wasn't going to have any students, and it just felt a bit random. So I thought, I know, let's give it a go. But actually, I realised I probably had more questions or concerns than I had answers. So I'm just going to share the process that I've been through. So the starting point, or my concerns, is that I totally appreciate that not everybody loves phlegm or gets as excited about the cough assist device as I do. And so I was really worried that somebody wouldn't find a 6 or 5 or 6 placement doing my job, in essence, that interesting. And also there are days where I sit literally at a laptop, my step count is like minimal, and in essence I think I've just done admin rather than even reading journal articles. And I was a bit like, I don't think that's actually that interesting for a student to be exposed to. It's the reality, but it's not interesting, and I'm not sure they're going to learn anything from that. I wanted to make sure that there was some access to patients, either that being face-to-face, and if it wasn't face-to-face, that's okay, but making sure that it was clear over the period of the placement how this research project or these research activities then benefited the patient within the pathway or were implemented into clinical practice. So I was trying to work that out in my head, which one came first, which was the best way around. I was worried about how I was going to set objectives and how I was going to mark a student, which seems daft because over 15, 20, I've had loads of students, but actually the marking scheme is very much set up for a clinical face-to-face patient setup, which this isn't going to be. So those were my concerns. And also, which students do I have? Am I a bit cheeky and say, well, actually, could we put out expressions of interest? So I get somebody or a group of people who almost want to participate. So that first hurdle of engagement isn't there. Or do I ask for students who are second, third year, for example? So they've started their clinical journey already, which is primarily the way in which many students think their career is going to go, clinical, which is fine. That's exactly what I thought too. But I didn't know whether I was allowed to do that. So those are all of my queries. But just on the right, just thinking, these are the 4 pillars, and research is very much one of those pillars of advanced practice. So yes, we are talking about undergrad physios here, but those pillars still apply absolutely. And I think it's really important that we share with our students as they're learning right from the word go the breadth of what you can do with a physiotherapy degree, and that's really important. And it saddens me greatly that we still have a shortage of placements, and I totally know the reasons for that and understand them to an extent, but I think we've just got to try and diversify a little bit more if we can. So I was really lucky that I reached out on social media and got so many responses. It was fab, and had the opportunity to speak with clinicians, educators, and also students. And the next couple of slides are just going to share my findings, really. So the first part is about the placement model or the placement setup. And actually every single person that I spoke to had totally different setups, which I think is amazing. It just adds this vast flexibility. It's not a one-size-fits-all model at all. And it means we can flex to almost where we're at of a research process or a research project. What skills the educator has, what kind of student is coming to us, what their learning needs are, how they learn best. We can just totally flex for that. So hopefully that means we can offer more of these and lots of different types of research placements too. Of the educators that I spoke to, they'd basically done a mix of either an expression of interest or they'd had either second or third years for the reasons that we talked about earlier. I'm not saying that approach is right or wrong. I don't really know the answer, but I do wonder whether, this is change for us as educators. This is also change for students. Normally it's just all clinical placements. When I trained, having a research placement, that just wasn't even a thing. It wasn't even an option or a thought process. So actually, is it fine getting people who are on board to start with? They can help spread the word, hopefully positive, but also they can help us adapt placements. This needs to be a really flexible process over the next few years to make sure we have the best model at the end of it. It's not going to be perfect first time at all, but they are integral to the development of this type of placement model. So lots of variation in the types of students coming too. All of the placements that I spoke to had some form of integration of clinical time. And this was quite clear, and this was important, that it was formalised. So the student and also the educator knew exactly what day was clinical and what day wasn't, in essence, what was research. And I think the students found that helpful because they knew what hat to put on. Like, today's my clinical hat, I'm thinking about this, that and the other. Whereas on the research days, it's a different notebook. And that's fine at this stage, I think. And I guess from an organisation perspective, that makes it easier. Some of the placements where it was split, it was just 1 day clinical to 4 days research. Some were 50-50. So again, that changed throughout. So hopefully that makes it more flexible for the student and also for the educator based on needs and resources, if you like. But I think for the clinical time, where it's a split and maybe there's a different educator for the clinical side and the research side, we need to make sure that they are talking so it doesn't feel to the student like they're having two separate placements. They need to be integrated throughout. That's the challenge that some of the students had faced. And then the last little bit to think about is that actually, again, all of the placements were a mix of face-to-face time, some virtual, we're all used to that now, and then also in and outside of the hospital. So the students would have some days at home, and they actually quite liked that. I mean, who doesn't like being at home with their slippers on? I certainly like it. But actually they still love that face-to-face contact, being part of a team. And also it's good, many benefits also for the educator too. So from the objectives and the marking perspective, again, this was a big concern to me because this is important. A lot of the marking schemes have clinical, professional and communication elements to them. Ours certainly do in Bristol. But actually they're also relevant to this type of placement for sure, especially if we have specific clinical time in them. So actually adapting them shouldn't be a problem. And I think we can learn a lot from speaking to our colleagues who have offered the leadership placements of how they've adapted wording and stuff. So I think that's something else that we could do going forwards. But again, making sure that from a clinical perspective specifically, that the objectives, they're not dampened down. I don't mean that to say that they're lesser objectives, but just making sure they are realistic. because somebody who's doing 1 or 2 days a week clinical is not going to be able to achieve the same as somebody doing 5 days a week. So it's managing those expectations, both of the students, but then also of the educators too. Many of the placements had an integrated project. So some were linked specifically to the overall research project that were happening. Some were things like, actually, I want you in this 5 weeks to scope what research is being done within allied health professionals within this trust. I mean, that's probably a question that we all need to answer and be able to document, because we quite often are supporting so many studies but don't necessarily get the acknowledgement for it. So lots of different projects that were being done, but all really, really interesting. So again, you can kind of fit that to the needs of your service currently, but also to the student. I've talked about managing expectations, but because these are so new, I think for me, linking in with the HEIs, they are very keen to link with us and just making sure we use them as a resource all the way through. So pulling that all together, just to finish with, this is how my placement is going to hopefully look like. So it's 5 weeks. We're going to start off just with some orientation, some background to the actual research study, so the merit trial, both from I'll do some short presentations, we'll chat it through, but they'll also have things to read in their own time, well, on the non face-to-face days, for example, setting objectives, and then also spending some time doing the online GCP training, which will follow through to week 2. Nobody I spoke to had actually got their students to do GCP training, but I just think yes, it's quite dry. You know, I'm not pretending it's the most exciting online training in the world, but it's so useful and it just gives such a lovely overview of the whole research process. And the student gets something at the end of it. They get the certificate to say, I've done this. And I think that's really important. And then I'm going to try and break up the weeks of what the focus is. So first of all, looking at the eligibility and the consent processes. So also spending time with research nurses and then gradually building it up as we go through the weeks. Linked in with that will be a couple of days a week, I think, specifically being clinical. We haven't worked out yet whether that's going to be with me or a different clinician. I'm just trying to work out how that would work. And all the associated learning opportunities that come with that, so like X-ray clubs, CTs, MDTs, etc. Carry on with some project work. Attend our research meetings. So I will specifically try and have my study advisory group during this placement, so they get to see that. PPI, etc. And then also spending time, as I say, with our research nurses, but also our research matron, our chief AHP, just an hour or so, but just so they get to understand how they input into research and what their role is. So hopefully some specific study exposure, but then trying to get them to understand the overall research process and how that's embedded then into clinical practice. It's a whistle-stop tour. And I really hope it initiates some conversation. I say I'm really sorry that I'm not able to join the webinar this evening, but I'd be really happy and keen to link offline. And if other people are thinking of having placements, if we can magically try and have them all at the same time, it would be amazing to set up some peer review sessions, both for educators, but also for the students as well, so they can share their experiences. So I really hope you have a good webinar, and I will hopefully speak to you all soon. Take care.
Next, we're going to hear from Helen Batty, who has been one of our educators for our leadership placement, and she is going to give us a higher education perspective. Take away, Helen.
Thanks, Eva. So my name is Helen Batty. Thank you so much for coming this evening. I am the very proud educator of Eva, Grace and Harris, and they've done an absolutely amazing job of putting this webinar on tonight. It was their idea, and I think that is just, you know, a testament to their innovative nature and the amazing work that they've done for us. So I am a physiotherapist by trade, and I work across the Allied Health Department at Sheffield Hallam. Next slide, Eva. So just to give you a little bit of background about our department, so we have 8 allied health professions. We have over 1,500 students. And our largest cohort is the physiotherapy cohort, which is 150 per year, and most of the other cohorts are around 100 per year. So we are a really big department. And we have a practice learning aim. We want to really embed all the pillars of practice within our practice learning. And we want these research, education and leadership placement to become part of the normal placement pathway. We really want these placements to be inclusive opportunities. So we don't want them to be, cherry picked. We don't want students to be cherry picked for these placements. We really want it to be an inclusive process for all, in the same way that any other placement would be. And clearly, as part of that, we want to enhance our placement capacity, and these type of placements are really going to do that. Next slide, Eva. So some perspectives from an HEI perspective. I know that we've got several HEI colleagues in the room tonight. And so some of the things that we need to do, it is a challenge. It is a culture change for all professions, really. And it's a culture change where we need buy-in from all stakeholders. So we need buy-in from staff at the university, we need buy-in from clinical partners, from researchers, and particularly from students. And one of the things I think Harris mentioned earlier was that we really need to prepare our students. So at the moment, there is some anxiety around these different types of placements and research placements. Because we're not preparing our students for them at the moment. It is something that's different. It isn't something that all of them have. And therefore, they are anxious about it, and often they're not getting, obviously, as much clinical experience within that. And all we do really at the moment is clinical placement. So for them, it's something very different. And that's something that we need to normalise. So we need to be talking about these type of placements at open days. We need to have them on our websites. We need to make it normal and just part of that normal placement pathway. So who can have a research, who can do a research placement? Anybody working in research can have students on a research placement. It's a huge untapped area of increased capacity for HEIs, really, for us, for our across AHP. There are a huge amount of different researchers at Sheffield Hallam. We're very lucky that we have a advanced wellbeing centre, and that's what we're working with Grace and Harris and Eva, putting this together at the moment, this project, to ensure that our students across AHP can have a research placement in the advanced wellbeing centre. But we're also working with local trusts. All trusts have got a research centre, all trusts are research active, and we really want to enhance that within our trusts as well. So this huge untapped area for increasing our placements. But we really need these placements to be engaging for students. We need them to be high quality practice learning experiences. And so there is lots of questions around, does it have to have service user involvement? And I think the answer to that is, the students clearly would like to have service user involvement. It isn't a necessity, and it shouldn't be something that puts people off having a student if they're not able to provide that, because they will be able to provide the students with all untold learning experiences. They will be able to meet other people and do a variety of different things that doesn't necessarily involve having service user involvement. So try to encourage people to engage with the research placement process despite not possibly having service user involvement. What's really key is it needs to be relevant for the student and relevant for their course, as our students have already said. And for HEIs, we need to be providing training and support for new research educators in the same way that we would for any other new placement provider. So, for example, at the Advanced Wellbeing Centre at Sheffield Hallam, we have some researchers there who are not health professionals, and they're also not lecturers, but they are involved in healthcare research, and so they can provide a really rich learning experience for the students. But it's up to us to be able to support those people, and then the model of supervision needs to be worked on around that. Time commitment is obviously something that people worry about. There is certainly a time commitment, as there is for any student placement, but the payback from that is huge. And again, that's something that we need to encourage researchers to think about. So, for example, the project that we've been doing with Eva, Grace and Harris, they, in 6 weeks, what they've accomplished is absolutely huge in terms of our project to get these research placements off the ground for our students, and we wouldn't have been able to do this in the next few months, and what they've accomplished in 6 weeks. So that time commitment and that payback for it is really worthwhile. We absolutely need to encourage a minimum of 2-to-1, 4-to-1 model. The peer support is key, and having those groups of students working together really works really well. Thinking about the supervision models again, as the students have already talked about, and how lovely would it be, like Emma said, to have peer support groups. Emma, Eva, Grace and Harris have been involved in a leadership peer support group with students from other universities, which they've really benefited from, and it would be great if other HEIs are thinking about doing research placements for us to set something up around that. And then obviously the other thing to think about, which Emma mentioned as well, is the learning outcomes and the competencies, which I'm just going to talk about now. Eva, next slide, please. So I thought I'd just give you a little demonstration really about how you can adapt the learning outcomes for your research placement. So this is an example of the physiotherapy learning outcomes for the students that are here tonight. It is changing, as I think has been put in the chat by my colleague from Teesside, Jill, that the physiotherapy is moving to a common placement form, so that every student in the country will be working to the same form, and how marvellous would be for all professions if we could make that happen. But this is what we're working with at the moment, and this is how we've changed it. So the top learning outcome there you can see is verbal and non-verbal written communication skills, the therapeutic relationship and multidisciplinary team. So we can adapt that in terms of the therapeutic relationship is around the professional relationship that the students are the people that they're dealing with while they're on placement. The range of communication skills, again, that's around the different situations they're going to be put in, verbal, non-verbal, written in terms of emails, social media, all of those types of things. And MDT working again in the different disciplines across the environment where they may be working. The second one is a much more clinically based learning outcome around clinical reasoning, service user assessment, problem identification and treatment planning. And again, clinical reasoning can be around identifying the problems that they're going to be facing within the research that they're putting together, and the project planning, potential strategies to solve them. The assessment, again, they're assessing situations, they might be doing focus groups, they might be talking to different people from different environments. And then the interventions of those academic research, educational and leadership interventions. So you can see that you can really adapt the learning outcomes. It's not a difficult thing to do, and your HEI will absolutely support you with that and help you with that. Next slide, please, Eva. So that's, again, just giving you a little bit of a brief overview from an HEI perspective of some of the things that we are facing, and we're very, very happy to help with anybody that wants to take this forward. So do contact myself. You can do that either via email, on Twitter, and myself and my colleague Jill from Teesside have set up the at AHP Practice Community of Practice. So we will always be able to contact us on there as well. Thanks, Eva.
Thanks, Helen. Next, we're going to hear a student's perspective. So Amy and Grace are two students currently finishing a research placement at the Research Centre at Sheffield Hallam. Hopefully they're going to talk to you and give you an idea of what a research placement looked like for them and their thoughts around how their placement has gone.
Thank you, Eva. So hi, I'm Amy, and you're going to hear from Grace in a little bit. So what I'm just going to talk to you about is, what our weeks look like and what our so far 6-week placement was like. So next slide, please. So we got every week we had a call at the beginning of the week with our educator, and we got given a few tasks to complete by the end of the week. So every week we had our regular critical analysis for paper, and that changed every week depending on what topic we wanted to look into or what sort of research we were actually going to concentrate on, for example, quantitative or qualitative. I then had a separate educator, which was Rachel Young, who does the Shape Master equipment, in which I got to do some transcriptions of an interview, and I got to then bring that all together into a framework analysis. So me and Grace got our educator that was together, and also a separate one.
Yeah, and I worked with Anna Lowe, and she was part of the Advanced Wellbeing Research Centre as well. And using some of my kind of past skills before I did this degree in communications and research in a research group, I worked on a project to help communicate the key messages for their Strong in Midlife project, which is about helping women in midlife and older stay strong and active. And then we also did individual projects, which were individual research reviews. So I looked at the effectiveness of orthoses and electrical stimulation at improving physical activity for people with central nervous system problems. And Amy looked at factors influencing engagement with physical activity in people with hypermobile EDS. We also did some patient and public involvement interviews. So we interviewed 3 people this past week, all who had central nervous system problems, and we were trying to just understand the patient perspective. Okay, next slide, please.
So because of where I am, I'm in Sheffield, so I actually got the chance to go in person 3 times, which was really, really good to get that balance. So the first thing I got to do was to see the exoskeleton, and I actually got to be the one wearing it, which was a really good experience, and it was quite a new thing. So we were trying to get an understanding of how it works. So that was a whole day spent in the AWRC, which was a really great experience. I also got to go to Steps Rehabilitation, which is a private neuro clinic, which I got to go to the Mind Maze event, which is like, it's quite a new piece of equipment that uses games to help with neuro rehab, which again was a really great experience. And then, as you can see from the photos at the bottom, these are the Shape Master equipment, which I got the chance to do the transcriptions for some interviews. And so I'm actually going to see them tomorrow morning. So that's going to be another chance to get in and see some things in person.
Yeah, so overall, kind of reflecting on the experience we had and the kind of transferable skills we were able to get to our clinical practice, and we developed a good understanding of quantitative and qualitative research. That was through the critical appraisals we were doing every week, but also for the research reviews that we were doing, we kind of did a lot of searching of the literature and a lot of analysing the literature as well, which was really useful. Gained confidence in the research process and how this can be useful in clinical practice. So just about understanding in clinical practice how we would think about how to use an evidence-based practice and how to search to find that kind of thing when we're actually on the job. Part of the research projects that have a real world impact. So working, as I said, Amy with Rachel and me with Anna about projects that are making a difference on the ground. And so that was really great. And then we also helped with critical analysis, which was helpful for our undergraduate degree. So on top of it being useful for our clinical practice as we move into our careers, it was also useful for our degrees, hopefully, in writing essays and in contributing to other research projects. Okay, and back to Eva, I think now. Oh, I think you're muted, Eva.
Thank you, Amy and Grace. That was really, really interesting. We hope this evening has been helpful to you and has sparked your thoughts and discussions around the benefits of research skills being developed through placements, the opportunities for researchers and students within these placements, and what student experience could look like in a research placement. Thank you so much for listening. And if you have any questions, we're here to answer your questions. Are there any questions in the chat that we can, any more questions in the chat that haven't been answered?
I think we've covered everything up until now.
Does anyone else have any questions that they've got about anything to do with research placements for any of us?
I think there was, oh, sorry, Tracy's got a hand up, Eva.
Hi, just say thank you so much. That's been really helpful for me. I've run some. I'm Tracy, by the way. I'm a cystic fibrosis physiotherapist and a clinical research fellow from York. It has been really helpful. We've run some leadership placements, but haven't yet run any research placements. So this has been really helpful to think about. My question was just that I know when I've run the leadership placements, one of the challenges we had was about the work that was going on in the university sort of alongside the clinical placement, and that feeling that people were sort of trying to plan their dissertation at the same time as planning a QI project for their placement. And I just wondered kind of how has that been for you guys? Is it difficult to balance anything you've got going on from university with something that's less clinical?
I think for us, we have our modules running alongside this placement, but we've been quite lucky that when we finish our placement this week, and over the next, we don't have anything specifically due until the end of March, so we've got time to still work through it. And we also have time after our placement. Within our leadership placement, it's still been the same sort of hours throughout the day. So we've got our time to do our work as we would if we were on a clinical placement as well.
Great, thank you.
Lindsay's got a hand up, Eva.
Go ahead.
Hi, I was just going to respond to the previous question, just to say that in Leicester we've had some placements for the research placements for the second years, and then that's before they've started to think about dissertation ideas. And then we've had the same student back to work with us on third year dissertation projects. So I think if you can time it well, you can actually use the same sort of data sets and work within the same teams for the students to complete their dissertations. So I'm happy to catch up offline. I think it was Tracy who asked the question, if you want to talk about that further. Thanks everybody for your presentations. I think you've all done a fantastic job.
Thank you. Rosalie, do you have a question?
I do. First of all, thank you. I was sufficiently interested in this to get out of bed at 5:30 a.m. in Australia to come and listen. And I want to tell you, it was really worth it. I've really enjoyed it. We don't exactly do placements like this over here yet, but it's my interest in this to learn how you're doing it and how you're embedding it, and what the students particularly feel about it. Because one of the things that has occurred to me, and I'd be interested in your thoughts, is I don't see any reason why we couldn't, once this is all embedded down and we all have really firm ideas about the best way of doing these things, I don't see any reason why we couldn't inject an international component into this, where you actually compare the way something's being done in one country to another. And I'm interested in what you think about that.
I think that's really interesting. Helen, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I think that is absolutely, that would be amazing to have some co-creation going on and some co-projects and things across various different countries. I know we have an association with La Trobe University, and it's definitely something that we would love to do. Caroline, do you want to?
Yes, so I actually have a PhD student who's a physiotherapist who's based at La Trobe, but she's doing a joint project. She's looking at physiotherapists' awareness of metabolic syndrome and conversations they have with service users about metabolic syndrome. And so she's doing focus groups and questionnaires in Melbourne, and then she's coming over to the UK and she'll do some work over here for a year as well. So so that's not quite placements, but it's kind of getting there. So I think that's a fantastic idea. Yeah.
And the reason I'm quite interested in this is because it's actually how research works. It's a global thing, and it's really important, I think, to expose our students as well to that idea that it's not only just local, what we do locally, which is really important, but in research that actually it's a global career. So and I'm also really interested in this for the leadership one as well, because we have absolutely superb directors of allied health. We've been doing directors and executive directors of allied health since 1989. And I think there's huge capacity there for leadership ones as well, leadership placements to be done that way. So well done. I'm still awake. It's really hard to get up at 5:30 a.m. I'm sorry, but I really am so glad I did. Thank you.
It's really impressive that you did. Thank you for coming, Rosalie. And I agree, you know, the leadership placements, I mean, there's been some fantastic examples already across various different professions in terms of leadership placements. And you can see, you know, how amazing the students are when they're given a project and they just run with it. And they put on something like this. I mean, and the work that they've done and how far they've taken us forwards in this, the project that we had in a very short space of time has been absolutely amazing. So yeah, it's really something that we need to roll out, I think, across all the professions, and that's what we're trying to do certainly at Sheffield Hallam and in many other places I know. I think Rebecca had her hand up next. She's been waiting for a little while.
Thank you. Sorry, just working out to mute myself. My toddler managed to hang me up in the middle of the webinar. I was just wondering, it was really interesting in your wrapping up, because you mentioned it, the idea of it being a research skills placement, which really interests me. We're in quite a small trust, which has quite a variable amount of active clinical research going on. So for one placement, there might be very little going on, but for another, that we might have a project that's actively recruiting that they can contribute to or whatever. The way we're looking at it at the moment is this idea of you know, evaluation and research being a continuum and looking at the kind of skills. So my current student, I'm getting to design a survey, which we're looking at using as part of an evaluation of a project that the team she's embedded in is working on. So there's a load of methodological skills and experience she can gain from that. Do you think, this is, I guess, to the university, the HEI kind of people, but the students, does it need to be proper, in inverted commas, research, which is like a funded study to have the kudos for this type of placement? Or do you think any kind of project evaluation work, which is, you know, giving them new skills and getting them to learn how the real world works, is good enough?
Caroline,
does that make sense?
that one?
I think, oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I proper research. What's proper research? I don't know. That's quite a blurry term. So I think we should think about the skills the students are gaining, really, and that they can gain research skills without it necessarily having to be sort of, you know, fundamental.
Right. That's where my brain was going, but I've been very much emphasising it as a research skills project being embedded into a clinical project. So it's looking at doing a hybrid model with a research skills element in it rather than.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I agree with you.
Nicola, did you have a question?
Yeah, question for you guys as students. Did you have any reservations about doing a research project? And a follow-up to that is, has it changed your perception of what you might do when you qualify?
Amy and Grace, do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, so I did have a lot of reservations, to be honest, because it's so new. But I can very confidently say that after the 6 weeks, it's been so interesting, and I didn't really appreciate how important research was as healthcare workers. So I wouldn't go as far to say as I've changed what I want to do when I qualify, but now I've had a taste of it, in a way I do kind of want to get into it a bit more. So I think because I've kind of had half and half of a placement in research and hands-on, so it'll be interesting to see, because I think it might play on my mind a bit, but it's been really interesting, and I did go into it with a lot of reservations, but I think it's been really good to get the opportunity to do it, and I think it'll be really important for future students as well.
Yeah, and I think I come from a bit of a different perspective. I think I've got 10 years on most of the other students because I'm a mature student, and I've done quite a lot of studying in the past in something very different. So I think that's also something that might interest other students, like mature students coming into this with a bit of other experience behind them. They might like that as well. So that's also something to think about, I guess. But reservations, I was really interested in it because I kind of heard about the Advanced Wellbeing Research Centre, and I thought it sounded really interesting, and so I kind of approached them about it, rather than Amy's perspective, which is that she just was given it. So yeah, I think there's some people will have reservations, but I think we're really well supported, and it was really nice to work with Amy as well, like together, kind of understanding something that was quite new to us both in this kind of sector. So yeah.
Nikki has put something in the chat. Nikki, do you want to come in? Are you? Nikki was Amy and Grace's educator. I don't know whether she can. No, she's not coming in. Just on that point, oh sorry, yeah, Nikki's got no microphone, but she's just said that in the chat that she found it worked really well to give the students some element of choice about what they were doing and what projects and things. So obviously, you know, that really enhances the student experience if they've had some choice within it as well, doesn't it? But just to pick up on the point there about the reservations around these placements, and that's exactly why we need to normalise them, like I said in my presentation, isn't it? Because, you know, if they are normal and they're just part of, you know, you're going to get a research placement, you're going to get a leadership, you're going to get intermediate care, you're going to get whatever, then, you know, it just becomes normal, and that's, I think, where we need to be. That's the vision, isn't it, for us all?
I'm just aware of the time, and we're happy to still go on. I think there's a couple of questions still to come, but
Catherine's had her hand up for a while, Eva.
Thank you for everyone who has come and joined this evening. If you need to go at this time, Catherine, I saw that you had a question.
Yeah, yeah, it's been fantastic. Thank you. It couldn't have come at a better time for me. I stumbled across this on Twitter, and it's been really interesting. And I'm an occupational therapist, but working in a research delivery role. So we're just looking to develop a placement in that setting. And I'd got a couple of questions, I suppose. The first one was whether anybody had got any sort of obstacles or any thoughts on whether from an R&E perspective or from the PI's perspective, whether there's anything that students can or can't be doing in terms of consenting to studies or doing certain assessments and things like that. I didn't know whether anybody had any experience in that way.
So throughout our project, we actually did look a little bit at that, and we thought that it does depend on what the training of the student has already had, and also what it would be the same for a clinical placement, what they've already learned. So they might need a supervisor to begin with, but later on with doing things they might not, or potentially at the beginning of a research placement, they may need some sort of training so that they can do those sorts of things. But we also spoke to a public involvement group, and I think for them, they said that they would need to know the qualifications. The service users would need to know the qualifications of the student to feel comfortable with them doing anything.
So being honest at the start of who, I mean, I suppose you would do that in a clinical placement anyway, wouldn't you? To say,
I think it is similar to a clinical placement in that you may go in there with not, you learn throughout the placement, so potentially later on in the placement, or to begin with, you might need support and a supervisor, but later in the placement you may be able to do things independently.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. And my other quick question was around, I know the university had said about sort of anybody facilitating a placement. There's quite a lot of research delivery officers in our team that aren't registered professionals as such, and they're really keen to support this as to support these student placements. So could we be looking at them being supervisors, and but then having that sort of long arm supervision to an AHP in their profession?
Caroline, do you want to touch on what we spoke to the AWRC about?
So do you mean about the dietetics, for example?
Yeah, just because, so when we looked at the AWRC, not all of the AWRC researchers are from an AHP background, but it would be AHP students going through to do the research placements.
So we talked about because a lot of the people who do research at the AWRC are not, they're not familiar really with things like competencies and you know, the learning outcomes and that sort of thing. So we very much talked about them needing training and support in order to make sure that the placements include, you know, took the learning outcomes into account and made sure that they were the competency-based courses, you know, that was built into the placement, that kind of thing. Is that sort of what you were getting at?
Yeah, I think, can I just come in there? I think the long arm supervision is absolutely where that would come in. So again, it's around looking at those different models, isn't it? And what we as an HEI can provide, and but absolutely they would be ideal to have students on a research placement, and the HEI would then, we'd have to work together to find out the supervision model in terms of in each individual profession and the needs of that profession. So for example, like, you know, the students have already mentioned that dietetics need some form of you know, dietitian. Occupational therapy have to have an occupational therapist, but they could very much do that as a long arm supervision. And that's already a model that works in different professions.
Oh, that's brilliant. And the team will love that idea. That's brilliant. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Are there any more questions? Harris, is there anything in the chat?
Not at the moment, just sort of discussions around the sort of placements.
I think there was a question earlier that was aimed at Amy and Grace about whether they did any research before the placement, like whether they had to do any like reading and stuff before the placement.
We had a meeting with Nikki and Caroline about what we might be able to do a bit of research into, and that was useful to just kind of get a bit of more of an understanding, because I think neither of us quite knew what we were going into, so it was useful to have some different things to look at just before. But I think our educators were aware that, you know, if you had a clinical placement, you wouldn't necessarily have to do specific work for it, so they didn't want to give us that, but it was useful to just see what the projects were about so we could know what was coming.
Great.
Well, thank you all for joining this evening. It's been really exciting and definitely sparked a lot of discussion, and I hope that all of the people that you've heard talk tonight have been really helpful and made you think about research placements and maybe hosting them, or whether you're a student and want to take part in one. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks for coming.
I think a big thank you to you guys, to all the 5 students that have been here, because you have done an absolutely amazing job. So thank you very much for all your hard work. You've been brilliant. And thanks everybody for coming, especially Rosalie for getting up very early. So lovely. Thank you very much, and see you soon.